Important thing to say 3 times, the protagonist is the Soviet Army. Soviet Army. Soviet Army. You can avoid the German stick. Unless you are a spy, the original introduction is too weak, and the main text is toxic. It has been revised, crossed out, sometimes it is easy to write frivolous. It is difficult to change, dish hashtag, but the author is trying to modify it, and the future article will be more serious and reasonable. If you have any opinions, please raise them, and we will try our best to make changes. If the German army had not encountered the cold wave of 41 years, and if the Soviet army had an advantage in the defense of Moscow from the beginning, could everything still be like the original history of a completely changed world line? Comrade, please start your World War II career. Legitimate military literature, but the protagonist is a woman, this cannot be changed. Chapter 1. We are moving forward. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Comrades, this is the author's first novel, which can only be considered as having a few flaws and not too hardcore. Comrades and fans of the military, please let it go. Brain storage area, remember to come back and eat freshly processed brain flowers after reading, which is beneficial for steadily improving intelligence. The ground became bumpy due to the previous airplane bombing, and the sunset hung on the mountain, releasing its final glow in vain. Well, the sun is as red as blood. At this moment, Yuyo was sitting upright on the front passenger seat of the vehicle, following its up and down. She slowly looked out the window with a confused expression on her face. Didn't I just hang up because I had a heart attack and didn't have time to take my medicine? What is the situation? I just wanted to ask the driver who I am, where I am, and what we are doing. As a result, before she could open her mouth, Yuyo suddenly felt her brain explode. So she simply fainted, of course, in the eyes of others, because she was too tired and fell asleep in the car. The convoy drove unsteadily for an unknown amount of time before finally reaching the retreat assembly point. Arrived at the assembly point, notify the troops to get off. Comrade teacher, comrade political commissar, she. What's wrong with her? The female officer, who was called the comrade of the division commander, looked surprised. One by one, it wasn't right. I personally checked and found out that she wasn't injured at all. She sleeps like a hibernating bear, unable to wake up no matter how she calls, and pushing her is useless. Comrade Shi Chang's face turned black. What did he do as a political commissar? She trotted quickly to the car carrying the political commissar, and as soon as she opened the door, she saw that Yuyo was actually snoring, which made her very angry. Just wanted to give Yuyo, who was sleeping soundly in the passenger seat, a few words of love education on her face. But she looked at Yuyo's sleeping face and reluctantly put down her hand. Forget it, you guys go fix it first. I'll help the political commissar go to the dormitory. The female teacher waved her hand. Yes. After speaking, the division commander carried Yuyo on his shoulder and brought him back to the officers' dormitory. Receiving memory was a bit slow, and in the blink of an eye, it was early the next morning. Oh. Rain, you woke up from sleep, got up and stretched lazily, slept well, really happy. Carrot, the next second, she couldn't laugh anymore. Because as soon as she looked up, she saw a Mao girl wearing a military uniform looking at her angrily. Comrade Angelina, you have finally woken up. As your chief officer, it is necessary for me to remind you. It is currently a state of war, please remain vigilant and don't sleep so hard anymore. Don't die without knowing how. As soon as I wake up, I am scolded head on, and no one's mood will be much better. It looks quite nice, why is it like a small mouth with honey on it? After seeing the person finish speaking, Yu walked out of the room and couldn't help but curse softly, bastard. Who knew that with just one mouth, there was a sound of vocabulary? She was so scared that she quickly covered her mouth and walked to the door, feeling guilty, looking out. Fortunately, the sound was quite quiet and no one outside noticed it. Closing the door, Yuyo couldn't help but start thinking about what was going on. It is obvious that I have traveled through time and should be in the military. Wait, what about the memory in your mind? Yuyo quickly began to reminisce. Oh, I am the political commissar of the lieutenant colonel of the 13th Division of the Soviet Army's reorganization. No, during World War II, where did the Soviet Union have any reorganization divisions? Isn't it all numbers plus a teacher? The more memories scroll down, the more incorrect they become. Except for some major cities and major generals whose names are still the same, some less well known cities have completely different names. Some countries are also like this. For example, what is this Nile? Curse people, right? But the German state in the West is still the same. Roughly flipping through all the memories except for herself, and fiercely supplementing the history of this world, Yuyo began to flip through her own memories. Angelina, female, Russian, born in 1917 in Moscow, both parents were martyrs. As a result, this guy is still a genius. He graduated from high school at the age of 16 and joined SG the same year. Because this child was intelligent and lively from a young age, and had excellent academic performance, coupled with different perspectives on the world, Angelina was sent to Moscow Advanced Synthetic Forces Command School to learn infantry tactics. 3 years later, she became one of the first military academy students to graduate early due to her outstanding academic performance. Due to Comrade Dahlon's great concern for the party in recent years, Angelina directly became the battalion commander and the rank of lieutenant. After working in the team for 2 years, Angelina performed outstandingly and was promoted to the rank of deputy regiment leader and political commissar, with the rank of major. Afterwards, she was sent to study at the Folongzi Military Academy. 3 years later, she graduated from here with excellent grades, was awarded the rank of lieutenant colonel, and was appointed as the political commissar of the reorganized 13th Division. As a result, she was caught up in the Patriotic War as soon as she came out. Under the fierce attack of the German army, the Soviet army retreated step by step and was led to famous battles such as the Minsk siege and the Kiev annihilation due to Comrade Dahlon's micro-operation cooperation. Fortunately, she hasn't been to any of these two places in between this year. But unfortunately, her division is only 30 kilometers away from Kiev. It can be said that there is a considerable degree of danger. For the current Iron Cross Army, there are only 4 words to describe it. Morning and evening. Some soldiers of the reorganized 13th Division can even hear the roar of heavy artillery in the distance. But fortunately, Comrade Dahlon gave up micro-operations, and Marshal Zhukov officially began his firefighting journey. Okay, the history here is also different from the original history. Zhukov came up and took a look. Oh, the strongest Southwest Front Army is gone, and it's just a fart. Give me the advantage of terrain to shrink the defense line. Step back. Step back. Step back. It is now June 29th, and they have retreated to the west bank of the Dnieper River to organize defense. Even Comrade Dahlon has called multiple times to confirm, indicating the urgency of the situation. After a moment or two of daze, Yuyo, oh no, she can now be called Angelina. She looked at the clock on the wall. 5:45 a.m. It's not too late yet. As someone who knows how to stay up late, is good at staying up late, and loves staying up late, she once even stayed up until 2:30 in the morning. She slept for at least 10 hours this time, and if she slept for a little longer, she would be judged unconscious by the military doctor. How could she still feel a little drowsy? She quickly got up from the bed, sorted out her clothes according to her memory, and then put on her military boots to go wash up. After doing so much, Angelina suddenly wanted to see what she was like now. Take out the pocket watch, open it, and a small circular mirror is hidden inside. Subsequently, the pocket watch fell to the ground with a clanging sound, as if blaming its owner for carelessness. I'll go. How could I be so beautiful? Angelina quickly picked up the pocket watch that had fallen on the ground, her face turning slightly red. Don't look at the cover for the protagonist's image, look at the first paragraph review: white long hair, orange-red pupils, a height of 1.72 meters, C+. This style of painting is simply anime. No, it seems that the world is in the shape of anime, and then I turned over the memory to confirm it. Angelina made a conclusion. Except that people in this world have an anime painting style, the other painting styles are similar to those on her planet. The appearance of most people here is about 10 to 20 points higher than that of people on their original planet. After holding the pocket watch and smelling beautiful for a while, Angelina suddenly looked serious and said, "What am I doing? This doesn't fit my usual personality." She put away her pocket watch, carried her gun around her waist, and strode towards the temporary command post, just as she had entered countless times before. As soon as she walked outside the temporary command post, a roar erupted inside, startling Angelina. Then, the sound of heavy tapping on the table and a sentence came from inside the command post. "Enough. I said, we're turning in." Chapter 2. Resume and Instructions of the Head Supervisor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Although Angelina was startled, she immediately walked into the temporary command post. This voice is the voice of Colonel Rosia, the division commander. I was scolded by her just now, so I was very impressed. In her memories, this is a truly fierce person. In Angelina's memory, Rosia was only 1 month older than herself, but she entered the Frunze Military Academy a year earlier than herself. After attending military academy and joining the army, fighting is like cheating. She became the deputy brigade commander, and before she even took office, the comrade of the brigade commander was arrested by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. It is said that she still provided the materials. At that time, people in the military were not convinced by her. Such a beautiful girl, what can you expect her to do? What is the result? After 2.5 months, she resorted to resolute measures to rectify military discipline and promoted a group of experienced grassroots officers. In her words, garbage should be thrown into the trash can. Subsequently, according to the orders of her division headquarters, she participated in the large-scale bandit suppression mission and completely wiped out the spies and rebels in her jurisdiction. I didn't even let go of a fly that had touched a spy. Unlike Angelina, who is just a newbie who has never seen blood before, this Rosia division commander is already a teacher who has participated in multiple battles. There's no way, most senior officers were shot during that purge, leaving behind either gods or Hello Kitty. Unfortunately, this ratio is about 1.3. That is to say, 1 teammate god has 3 teammate traps. So encountering Rosia, the commander who knows how to fight, is simply Angelina's blessing. So why could Angelina be assigned to her subordinates? In recent years, due to the continuous strength of the Iron Cross, although there are voices of the Soviet and German families within the alliance, Comrade Dahlin has still strengthened his defense against the Iron Cross. Although it's not very useful, I was still deceived and crippled by others before the war started. As soon as the war broke out, Comrade Dahlin's people became numb, and the most powerful Southwest Front army was directly destroyed in one pot. Not to mention the occupied Polish region, even several important cities of our own have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Minsk is gone, Kiev is also gone, Donetsk is almost gone, Leningrad is surrounded. After a series of disastrous defeats, the Soviet commanders became extremely scarce. When Rosia's brigade was expanded into the 13th Division, she searched through the roster given to her by the headquarters, and in the end, her face turned green with anger. The person with the best resume has only served as deputy regiment leader and political commissar, but she is an alumnus and 1 term younger than herself. How can a team-level commander be suddenly transferred to a division-level commander? Isn't this a commotion? As a result, the headquarters said, "You are not an elite reorganized division, and even the elite troops only have brigade-level commanders as supplements." So Lucia retreated and asked for the second best. Can't the people in my own journey be able to withstand it? A few days later, a comrade from the Ministry of Internal Affairs came to have a conversation and asked if Rosia had hilltop ideology. Okay, what else can Lucia say now? I can only recognize it by pinching my nose. I don't know if the new political commissar is a bookworm or someone with skills. And then, just as we met, Angelina slept soundly in front of Rosia and slept so soundly. The result is so Lucia was unhappy, and Angelina was happy. The military rank was raised by 1 level, and the rank was directly raised by 4 levels. Where is this still a rocket? This is the speed of light. Memories are over, let's move on to the main topic. So with her fiery personality, it's not strange to shout loudly. Someone must have offended her. In wartime, what else can make her unhappy and dare to shout out, besides the problems of her subordinates? Moreover, with the content she just shouted loudly, it is not difficult to determine the reason. There is only one truth, and that is that some comrades have developed inappropriate emotions. Report. Comrade Commander, I'm here. Did some comrades' beliefs waver just now? Rosia glanced at Angelina with a hint of surprise in her eyes, but it quickly faded away. Then she said calmly, Comrade Political Commissar, you're here at the right time. Hurry up and do some ideological work with this brigade commander. Comrade Brigadier General turned his head and saluted Angelina before reluctantly saying, Comrade Political Commissar, I am Captain Mikhail of the 3rd Brigade of the 13th Division. Comrade, do you have any questions? Why did you argue with the teacher? Mikhail took a deep breath and said in a slightly trembling voice, Comrade Political Commissar, our comrades in the brigade generally have a fear of the enemy, and even I am a bit uncertain. Everyone is afraid of the unknown German army. After all, the war report may deceive people, and the front line will not. Oh, which tribe are you from? Although somewhat puzzled, Mikhail replied honestly, Ukrainians. Angelina continued to ask, so what ethnicity are the 1st Brigade Commander and the 2nd Brigade Commander? Mikhail thought for a moment and said, they should all be from the Ush ethnic group. Well, it's another ethnic group that I don't know if it has existed in the original history, just don't know where Comrade Shur is from. Seeing Angelina's gaze directed towards Rosia, Mikhail quickly added, the teacher's words are Belarusian. I am Russian, so since we come from different ethnic groups, why are we in the same trench today? Angelina asked the question. Mikhail turned his eyes twice and then said in a somewhat uncertain tone, because we are all from the same country. Yeah, we come from the same country. Angelina nodded in approval and then said low, but now this country is being invaded, and her people are being killed by the army of the Iron Cross. And you, these soldiers who were supposed to protect her, are timid here. As Mikhail's head gradually lowered, Angelina suddenly raised her voice, Comrade Mikhail, please look me in the eye. Mikhail was startled and immediately stood up straight. No matter how strong the German army is, what's going on? If he's strong, shouldn't we resist? If his strength is stronger than ours, will we definitely lose? Why don't we compare a few pieces of paper and see which one is weaker and which one surrenders? If we hold on firmly, there will be a solution. With his iron-crossed national armor, we will have depth and climate. As long as we survive the first year of his blitzkrieg, we will have a chance. Remember, we are soldiers, and our responsibility is to defend our country. We are not only defending our motherland, but also your nation and family. For them, I am willing to sacrifice first. Because my parents are both martyrs, I have nothing to worry about anymore. Isn't all the sacrifices we have made today for the sake of our country and the people? Even Angelina herself did not expect that she could speak so many words in one breath. It seems that I have inherited the eloquence of the original owner. Suddenly, Mikhail saluted Angelina and said, Comrade Political Commissar, I finally understand. For the sake of our country and the people, I will definitely manage my trip well. After some deception, under Rosia's shocked gaze, Mikhail, who had just been arguing with her with a flushed face and ears, actually shouted with high morale to rectify discipline. "What was your reasonable and well-founded rebuttal to my words just now? Why don't you talk to the political commissar?" "Comrade Commander, there is a high probability that the problem has been solved, but I am worried that the other two brigades will also have this kind of problem." "Why don't I go there?" "Oh, it's possible. You go ahead." Seeing Angelina walking away, Rosia sat down and stood on the table with her right arm, supporting her head. Some skeptical people said, "Do political workers nowadays have such sharp tongues?" Chapter 3. Pre-war deployment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. An hour later, Angelina walked back with a strange clatter on her face. Rosia was currently drawing a strategic map, and as soon as she looked up, she saw Angelina's strange expression. "Comrade Political Commissar, what can I do for you?" "It's nothing, I just want to ask, are all your subordinates honest people?" Why do we have to ask such a question?" "The two remaining brigadiers of yours started to take the initiative to fight before I could do any ideological work. Their performance was different from that of the 3rd Brigade when they grew up. Why are they both brigadiers and the difference is so big? The 1st Brigade Commander Andrei and the 2nd Brigade Commander Aplyevsky have a high level of ideological consciousness, you don't have to doubt it." Rosia rubbed her forehead, waved, and let Angelina come over. "Comrade Political Commissar, come and study our strategic defense map with me." Angelina quickly stepped forward and leaned against Rosia's right side. Rosia was squeezed and reluctantly curled her lips, giving up half of her position to the left. Angelina only began to observe the Soviet defense map, which depicted densely packed red and blue troops. Although both sides had similar numbers, it represented a clear advantage of the German Blue Army. The situation looks very bad. This is a front line that stretches hundreds of kilometers, and the defending Soviet army only has 520,000 soldiers from the Southern Front and 380,000 soldiers from the newly reorganized Southwest Front. Including some miscellaneous troops, the total strength can only break through 1 million. The 13th Division of Rosia's reorganization escaped the Kiev encirclement because it was located later. Belonging to one of the few remaining division-level units of the former Southwest Front Army. And their opponents were the German Southern Army Group and the Servant Army, totaling 63 divisions and over 970,000 soldiers. The problem is, it seems that the Soviet army has tens of thousands more troops, still engaged in defensive warfare, but their combat effectiveness is completely inferior to that of the German army. When they start fighting, they will be pinned to the ground and beaten violently, at most they can only fight against the more elite Servant army. Angelina's gaze turned to the defense line of her division, which was responsible for a 20-kilometer-long defense line, even the west bank position of the Dnieper River. What does this mean? If you lose directly, it will be difficult to cross the river. Upon seeing this, Angelina couldn't help but feel a toothache. In history, the Southwest Front Army at least survived until the end of September. Why was the Southwest Front Army almost completely destroyed by the end of June? I'm afraid we'll have to fast forward to the Battle of Stalingrad. Flip through my memory, oh, Littlebeard went to war in March this year. Damn it, this guy has become so smart. I don't know if Moscow can survive until winter. Comrade Political Commissar, do you have any opinions? Seeing Angelina's face constantly changing, Rosia couldn't help but feel a bit strange. Angelina finally came to her senses and said, "My military positions are all on the west coast, it's very dangerous." Indeed, that's true. Rosia nodded, but this is also an order from our superiors, and there are also troops on the east bank that will receive us. Our superiors require us to hold on until mid-July before we can withdraw. People are numb, completely numb. Superior, why don't you listen to what you're saying? The German army can see the water of the Dnieper River in at most 5 days, no, 3 days. That is to say, their reorganized division of over 10,000 people must defend the 20-kilometer-long position on the west bank of the Dnieper River for at least half a month. How can we fight this? This is probably something that God himself needs to wear a helmet to fight and defend. Rosia gave up the idea of asking Angelina if she had any ideas when she saw her furrowed brow. This is my deployment diagram. Take a look, is there anything else I need to add? After looking for a while, Angelina boldly added, I think the position of this regiment here is not right. It's more like placing it here. Also, the artillery positions here are too exposed and easy to be hit. It's best to deploy them here, and this position. After saying about 4 or 5 things, suddenly she noticed that there were traces of changes on this deployment map and couldn't help but ask curiously, hey, why does this deployment map seem to have been modified? Alright, dear political commissar, you have passed my second test. It seems that your tactical vision is still good. However, although your deployment is better than the one above, there are still some issues, said Lucia on the side. Subsequently, Lucia picked up a pen and began to redeploy, tracing some areas and erasing others before starting in another area. Although the general direction is similar to that of Angelina, it is clearly more detailed. Rosia's skilled operation made Angelina's eyes skip a beat. Because those positions may not seem the best at first glance, but they are precisely the most suitable positions for combat. Is this the difference between an ordinary genius and a god? Angelina can see that it's always right to follow the teacher in the future. She will never go west if she goes east. The tactical level is more than 1 point higher than oneself. Do we still need to ask about our strategic level, and we must humbly seek advice? Rosia received a satisfactory answer. If Angelina had answered that she had no objection to this plan, then she would have been panicked about having such a military-ignorant political commissar in her division. Fortunately, the political commissar's ability to talk on paper is quite good. Although Angelina has almost no combat experience, her tactical vision is still good. Just like when I graduated from the Fulongzi Military Academy back then, there is still a chance to cultivate. Rosia thought to herself. The two of them sorted out the combat plan and first reported it to the military headquarters via radio to confirm its accuracy. Then, they lowered the plan to the brigade level and issued it layer by layer. The core content of the plan is to establish 3 lines of defense, rotate the troops in sequence, and occupy the main support points for use in advance. The German army deserves praise for its rigor. Rosia planned to use the German army's advantage to make an article. After all, reconnaissance vehicles can also delay reconnaissance for a while and a half, right? Of course, the established defense line cannot exceed 3 lines. Because once it exceeds 3 lanes, not only can it not accommodate so many Soviet soldiers, resulting in large-scale unnecessary casualties during enemy shelling, but it will also lower morale due to multiple missed positions. With the command of the frontline division headquarters, the soldiers below began a long journey of digging trenches. For a moment, the 20-kilometer defense line on the west bank of the Dnieper River, which belonged to the reorganized 13th Division, began to dust and the sound of shovels was deafening. Tens of thousands of officers and soldiers in the entire division shuttled through the trenches that have just begun to take shape, waving shovels and desperately digging, as if trying to turn over the entire piece of land. Some soldiers even hummed a tune, which accelerated the rhythm of the soldiers beside them, which can be considered as cheering for the troops. However, it is precisely because of this that some funny things have happened. Someone asked a soldier who hummed a song which song he hummed. Someone next to me responded, "Is it Katyusha?" Someone immediately retorted, "In my opinion, this is clearly Long Live the People." At this moment, the humming guy replied, "That's how I hummed when I was farming in Ukraine." The scene was extremely awkward at one point, and everyone began to dig under their heads. However, in no time, the soldier continued to hum one by one, which was still his kind of local tune. Everyone is very motivated. Standing on a small dirt slope, watching the dusty scene before her, Angelina couldn't help but point to Rozia's busy Soviet soldiers. This indicates strong morale, which is beneficial for the upcoming battle. The difficulties are still ahead. Comrades' minds are probably all thinking about killing the enemy and making achievements. 5 days later, they won't think so anymore. Rozia glanced at Angelina, patted her shoulder, and then walked back. Let's go, Comrade Political Commissar. We also need to consider what will happen after the failure of the obstruction. Upon hearing these words, Angelina's face couldn't help but become serious. Comrade, please refrain from saying such things that are detrimental to unity in the future. But she only symbolically educated, and she still chose to follow behind Lucia. At this moment, Lucia, who was walking ahead, couldn't help but smile on her face. Her political commissar turned out to be not a dead brain either. Because of a stubborn brain, it's time to start arguing with one's own boss. Chapter 4. Battle of the Neber River. Adherence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On July 2, 1941, the First Battle of the Neber River broke out. Troops have already engaged in combat with the German army in the southern region. It is said that it was the 2nd Armored Group of the South led by German General Streiter. It can be said that this battle has already begun. Rozia received the telegram and calmly looked at Angelina. Comrade Political Commissar, how do you feel now? Angelina's face turned slightly red with nervousness and excitement at this moment. Comrade Commander, I am already ready. My Political Commissar Comrade, I wish you could still be so brave when you go to the battlefield. Lucia took off the red-starred hat, trimmed her golden hair, and then put on the hat again. Prepare to boost the morale of your comrades after the first round of battle. Understood. Angelina couldn't help but stand up and salute. Rozia was stunned for a moment and also stood up to salute. At 4:30 a.m. on July 3, 1941, the Soviet Army reorganized the 13th Division as the first line of defense on the west bank of the Dnieper River. We have discovered the enemy. Company commander, wake up quickly. Should we shoot? A sentinel keenly noticed the figure of a person several hundred meters ahead and immediately woke up the company commander. Are you sure it's a German? The platoon leader stood up somewhat bewildered. Okay. What are you waiting for? Wake up everyone and call the communication soldiers to notify the battalion commander. Move the enemy closer. If they fire flares or artillery, we'll immediately hide in the tunnel. Yes. As soon as the two finished speaking, they suddenly heard the sound of shells tearing through the air. Not good, enter the tunnel. The deafening sound of gunfire swept across the sky, and a single shell instantly landed on the Soviet position. The shock wave generated by the explosion left the entire position unrecognizable, and the resulting light could simply illuminate the night. Some insufficiently sturdy potholes were directly crushed, and the Soviet soldiers buried inside lost their mobility due to injuries. They eventually stopped breathing due to hypoxia and excessive blood loss. The shelling has stopped, counterattack, counterattack. For a moment, more than 10 flames spewed out from the Soviet positions, causing the momentum of the German attack to stagnate. But soon, the German tanks number 3 and number 4 began to take action. With the sound of the tank's main guns, each firepower point was accurately intercepted. Anti-tank guns. You guys are firing. Don't worry. The Soviet army operating the anti-tank gun aimed at the German tank and quickly fired. Boom. A German number 3 tank was hit on the spot and subsequently exploded. Bula. The Soviet army's originally low morale was suddenly boosted. However, this shelling also led the German army to discover the location of Soviet anti-tank guns. With several tank shots, the anti-tank guns and their operators were sent to the sky. Seeing that this was not a solution, everyone was suppressed and couldn't lift their heads, and the Soviet company commander was also anxious. Organize a daring death squad, party members go first. This scene can be said to be ubiquitous on the 20-kilometer-long front. Sitting in the command center, listening to the rumbling sound of cannons and shouts of killing not far away, Angelina couldn't sit still and said, "I want to go out and take a look." "You can't go yet. It's too dangerous outside. Besides, you're a division-level commander. If you die, I won't be able to explain it to my superiors." Rosia collected battle reports from the frontline troops and compared them with each other, allowing the Chief of Staff of the division, Dukhachikov, to outline and revise the deployment plan. Obviously, some areas that were originally red have now turned blue. Angelina could only give up after listening. Just constantly pacing around the division headquarters, occasionally glancing at the combat map. After nearly 2.5 hours of fierce competition, the main position remained firmly in the hands of the Soviet army, and the sky gradually became brighter. Suddenly, a communication squad leader stumbled in and said, "Commander, no problem. The forward command post of the 1st Brigade was hit by German shells." Brigadier Andrei, along with the Chief of Staff and several other comrades who were at the brigade headquarters at the time, sacrificed themselves on the spot. "All right, I have to go up now." Angelina straightened her hat, picked up her gun, and strode towards the position of the 1st Brigade. The Chief of Staff wanted to stop her, but was stopped by Lucia. "Let her go. This is something every qualified commander must go through, and now we can only pray for her. May Lenin bless her." Quickly, Angelina reached the first line of defense, and the German army had already retreated, preparing for a second wave of attack. Finally on the front line. What's that sound? Comrade Political Commissar, quickly lie down." The communication class leader next to her immediately shouted and reminded Angelina. Angelina was not a fool either, she rolled straight into a nearby crater. And quickly follow the method taught by the instructor to prevent gunshot injuries, so that the chest cavity is out of contact with the ground. The sound of shells piercing through the air was heard in her ears, and Angelina only felt a burst of sky and earth shattering, with gunpowder scattered everywhere. "I don't know how many pieces of dirt hit me and how much dust covered me." Unfortunately, a stone bounced directly onto Angelina's smooth forehead. Angelina only had time to let out a muffled groan and felt a stream of heat flowing down her head. "Touch it, it's red, lick it, it's a bit salty, it's meowing, it's blood." Angelina had to take out her handkerchief to stop the bleeding. Fortunately, the stone was not big, and the wound was not big either. At most, it was only half a centimeter long, and the blood quickly stopped. 10 minutes later, the shelling stopped and she stood up unsteadily. Looking at the scattered limbs on the ground, her face turned pale. Fortunately, she didn't spit it out and quickly entered the trench while cursing. Seeing the arrival of the political commissar, the soldiers were all excited. Although there was still a commander who insisted on commanding the battle, the fact that the comrade of the division political commissar personally came still moved them. Especially the political commissar is a beautiful girl. Of course, this is not the most important reason, for the people, for the motherland, Bula. Bula. Command post of the 13th Division of the Soviet Army Reorganization. The enemy's intention is now very clear, which is to cut us off in one fell swoop and then use 2 pincer attacks to defeat us. Colonel Dukhachikov, Chief of Staff of the division, pointed to the battle map. "If only the troops were a bit more elite, then we could first let the German army in. And then give him a 2 bread and cheese sandwich. The quality of the troops is not good enough now, we can only focus on the defense of the central position." The casualty report is out. The division staff finally sorted out the documents. Nyen. Rosia clenched her fist and was mentally prepared. The 1st Brigade suffered 673 deaths, 193 missing, 326 minor injuries, and 82 serious injuries. The current disappearance and serious injury can basically be sentenced to death. Some people are alive, but they have already died. The casualties caused by the first wave of German attacks exceeded 1,000, close to 1 regiment. Rosia began to consider how to get through the next few days. Chapter 5. Top Command. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The second round of German attack began at noon. Under the relentless counterattack of Soviet soldiers, after 3 hours of bloody battle, the German offensive finally declared failure and the entire army retreated like a tide. The fully formed 2nd Brigade immediately took over from the heavily injured 1st Brigade and continued to build trenches for the first line of defense. The 3rd Brigade takes care of the 1st Brigade from the rear and consolidates the 2nd and 3rd lines of defense. Rosia's diary. On the afternoon of July 3, 1941, in the Battle of the Neber River, the 1st Brigade had suffered more than 1,800 casualties, and the 2nd Brigade could only be allowed to take over and strengthen its central position. The German army occasionally heard sporadic gunshots and shelling, causing the officers and soldiers of the 2nd Brigade, who were exhausted from repairing trenches for a while, to rest restlessly. Angelina disinfected the small wound with alcohol to prevent infection. Subsequently, she forcefully carried out ideological work on the officers and soldiers of the 2nd Brigade. He meows, the political commissar not only needs to speak up, but also cannot let down his actions. In the second round of German charge just now, Angelina commanded the battle not far from the front line and even pulled a rifle from a sacrificial soldier to snipe 2 German soldiers. One of the German soldiers had a brain teaser due to a headshot, and the satisfying scene directly exhausted her mental energy. And perhaps this is just luck for beginners. At this time, there was already a commotion in the command center of the reorganized 13th Division. Rosia was cursing at a telegram, her face flushed with anger. The Chief of Staff wanted to hold her down, and 2 other staff officers were urging her not to be so angry. I'm really, telegraphic sound, why is the friendly army's head like it's been kicked by a donkey? Are these scumbags who are hindering us all a bunch of losers? The German army broke through their positions with a wave of attacks and was completely annihilated. National curse. Cursing to the point of excitement, Rosia picked up a pen and wanted to smash it. As a result, he lifted it up in mid-air, paused, and then put it back in his pocket. She turned to pick up the pencil from the table and threw it to the ground. I'm so angry. Comrade Commander, calm down. Isn't there still about 90% of the defense forces that haven't been broken through yet? Besides, the troops that have been broken through are still far from us. Dukachikov grabbed Rosia's arm as he slapped the table heavily. Our nearest lost position is also 120 kilometers away, which is equivalent to having 5 divisions on our flank. What's the use of 5 divisions? Back in Minsk and Kiev, dozens of divisions were thrown in. What's the use? After speaking, Lucia took out a box of cigarettes from her pocket. Take out one, light the fire, and take a deep breath. Then he handed a cigarette to the Chief of Staff of the division with his backhand. Every time a political commissar is present, they always dislike her for having a strong smoking smell, which makes her an old smoker who can only avoid smoking with Angelina. Alas, we cannot teach bad children, as our hearts are tired. After smoking a cigarette, Lucia's mind also became active. The first line of defense cannot be defended anymore. Let the troops immediately fill the gun holes and create a false impression that there are still people in the position. Everyone must quietly withdraw from me. Yes. Although he didn't understand why Rosia was doing this, Dukachikov still followed suit and asked the staff to convey instructions. The first line of defense. What? Withdraw. We need to fill the blast hole. Angelina looked at the instructions sent by the division headquarters, feeling a bit puzzled for a moment, but she immediately followed them. Anyway, what the teacher did must have her profound meaning. Many comrades in the 2nd Brigade are secretly speaking ill of their division commander. They have not seen the enemy on one side, nor have they fired a single shot. They have repaired the trenches for a long time, and in the end, they have to fill the gun holes. Isn't this playing with oneself? Only some seriously injured soldiers persisted in staying to create a false impression of a large army on the battlefield. But the blast holes have already been filled, and if we want a seriously injured person to stay in a trench and survive from the fierce German artillery fire, the possibility of this is almost zero. Many people feel a bit frustrated and puzzled, but they still strictly follow the orders and fill every blast hole tightly. At 5 p.m. on July 3, 1941. Not long after everyone had just withdrawn to the second line of defense, the German artillery attack on the first line began. This time, the artillery attack was more intense than the previous two. Looking at the sound of gunfire ahead, Angelina couldn't help but truly admire Lucia. Her sense of war was indescribable, simply divine. The first temporary defense line has already been scattered by artillery fire, and even if it is repaired immediately, only a small part of it has been repaired. I thought the German army would wait until the night of July 3 to launch a night attack, but I didn't expect their third round of attack to come so quickly. Unfortunately, war never tires of deceit. At this point, the first line of defense was devoid of any living people, and there was a dead silence. The roar of the German armored units masked the sound of infantry walking, as they slowly advanced forward. Angelina looked at Apleyevsky, the commander of the 2nd Brigade, who was holding a telescope and carefully observing, and couldn't help but nervously rub her hands. "Comrade Commander, how is the situation ahead?" "They are only 80 to 150 meters away from the first line of defense position. I request our artillery regiment to extend their artillery fire according to the original coordinates," said Apleyevsky, his eyes not moving away from the telescope. "Sure, I'll ask immediately." Soon, the division headquarters called back and said, "Approval. The artillery regiment is about to fire." When the first German army stepped onto the battlefield and found that there were no living people left, the Soviet artillery counterattack was also about to come. For a moment, the artillery fire plowed through the soil like plowshares, harvesting the lives of the attacking German army. Some German troops wanted to enter the original position's gun hole, but were shocked to find that the gun hole in this position had already been filled. Finally, most of them went to see God in extreme despair. The artillery fire advanced like a wall, and many German troops were blown to pieces before even turning around. Armored vehicles, tanks, and more were buried one by one in the sound of gunfire. The battlefield situation seemed to be very good, and the Soviet soldiers hiding in the trenches felt even more grateful for the original orders. However, the observant Angelina observed that the Soviet artillery density did not seem to be a single regiment, with only 2 battalions at the top. In no time, the German artillery launched a counterattack, suppressing the gunfire in the direction of the most intense sound. The Soviet No. 1 artillery position was dealt a devastating blow in an instant. Command post of the 13th Division of the Soviet Army reorganization. The artillery battalion is gone. The Chief of Staff of the division held a telescope and looked painfully at the mountain covered by artillery fire in the rear. The 2 staff officers of the division headquarters have been dispatched to the artillery 2nd and 3rd battalions to participate in surveying and mapping work. Otherwise, most of the data required for bombing the first position would not have been measured in advance. Let the artillery 2nd battalion not save me shells and shoot out in one go. Blow up the German artillery positions hard. I don't want our logistics list, I only want the enemy's casualties. Rosia punched the table fiercely. Soviet 2nd Artillery Base. Revenge the comrades of the artillery battalion. 3 rounds of rapid fire, Huaibei. Fire. 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 Invaders, go to hell. Keep reloading. For a moment, the German artillery positions also suffered great losses. Cannon, blown upside down and tattered. People, being bombed in all directions, transform into immortals. The celebrating German artillery cheered as they were blasted into the sky and sent back to their hometown. And the Soviet army actually hasn't asked them for money yet, indicating that they should take them home to have a look, which is what they should do. Both parties are very satisfied. This is all thanks to the top command, Lucia. Chapter 6. Both Heartbroken Parties. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In this way, the German army in the third round of attack finally retreated like a small river in the desert. They were heavily exposed. The time arrived at 1:00 a.m. on July 4, 1941. At this moment, the commander of the 19th Light Armored Division of the German Army, Stern, had already turned red in his eyes and was looking at the casualty report with huge casualties written in his hand. Nearly 2,000 people died in the battle, and there are too many injured, which is still being counted. He hasn't suffered such a big loss since he was born in his mother's womb. I saw other German troops flying towards the command center of the Southern First Army Group like snowflakes with good news. Here I am, but the retribution fills my heart like snowflakes. Even when I accidentally fell asleep just now, my mind was filled with sadness. Is this reasonable? This is unreasonable. Isn't there an ordinary Soviet reorganization division on the other side? Not even elite, he led himself by the nose in positional warfare and even cast a psychological shadow on himself. Attention, it's a positional battle. Yeah, guerrilla warfare can still be endured. In positional warfare, how could one be easily led by the nose? It's not that our army is incompetent, it's that the Soviet army is too cunning. Stern began to hypnotize himself. It's like this, what is it? With such heavy casualties, I am not only unique in the current attacking forces, but also stand out among the crowd. Okay, it doesn't seem to make much difference. In short, after paying such a high price to break down a defense line, he is completely numb. Your Excellency, here is your opponent's information. A German staff officer walked in, holding a stack of information in his hand. Oh, let me Kong. Stern immediately took the information as if he had received chicken blood. He had already begun to imagine what kind of senior Soviet general he was facing against. Well, that's great. I knew the Soviet commander across from him must be a seasoned woman. At this moment, Stern's brain was completely blank. Schwa. His psychological defense line has completely collapsed. I wouldn't do this if you were a man. But you told me, I'm not even as good as a woman. At that moment, he remembered the big and small kings in playing cards. Then, he suddenly smiled bitterly. He waved his hand and asked the German staff officer to leave without disturbing him. And he eventually fell into a baby-like sleep due to mental exhaustion. That night, he dreamed of 1,000,000 heads of state throwing pencils at him. The next morning, he was found dead from heart failure at the age of 37. The German army praised him domestically, saying that he died in service and was an excellent Aryan. Before his death, he still commanded outstanding battles. Internally, he has been scolded as a rare hook stone and his deeds have been whipped everywhere. The Soviet intelligence agency had no idea about this at all. And when they find out about it, they also learned about this matter. After all, no one would hype up such a small teacher. Only some military enthusiasts in later generations dug up this matter and compared it with the diary of the famous Soviet general Rozia. This proves how this general died from exhaustion. Sterling. As long as you are happy. At this time, Lucia was also completely exhausted by the thunder. She wanted to receive a telegram early in the morning, only to find that the radio station was broken. Ask the 1st Brigade, their radio station has been blown up. Ask the 2nd Brigade, the radio station of the 2nd Brigade was accidentally left in the gun hole by careful soldiers. Does the 3rd Brigade have it now? This brigade hasn't even taken on combat missions, how could there be a reason to say that the radio station is gone? Hey, you can hear the reason today. Before the 2nd Brigade entered the battlefield, for the convenience of command, they specially borrowed the radio station of the 3rd Brigade. Lucia. Hee, national curse, alright, we can't get in touch with the outside world now. Because just yesterday, due to the fierce nature of the Soviet reorganized 13th Division, its friendly forces on both sides were heavily cared for by the German army and had to withdraw across the river. Since the outbreak of the Battle of the Dnieper River 2 days ago, 25% of Soviet troops on the West Bank have been forced to retreat and 5% have been annihilated. The remaining 70% will be persevering. So, the Soviet General Command learned about the average logistics of each unit and then changed a reasonable order. To hold on for 5 days, which means theoretically no retreat is allowed until 0:00 on July 8. The ranks of officers above the battalion level who crossed the river in advance will be demoted 1 level each, and the promotion of the remaining personnel will be postponed for 1 year. The rank of the troops who complete the task will not be promoted or demoted, but they will be given priority for supplementation. At the beginning, listen to the mournful voices. Only the 13th Division had no concerns about reorganization, as they had already lost contact. The headquarters had reported it, and even the brigade's radio stations had been tried one by one, completely unreachable. In the command center, a wise Soviet staff officer immediately reported that the reorganized 13th Division was highly likely to be annihilated. Marshal Zhukov looked at it, sighed, and threw the flag of the reorganized 13th Division into the trash can. Due to the sudden death of the German commander in charge of the attack, Stern, on duty, the spearhead of the German attack suddenly came to a halt. Everyone, including Lucia, spent these magical 2 days in fear and anxiety. Lucia's diary. July 4 to July 5, 1941, it was a magical 2-day period where we couldn't figure out the specific intentions of the German army. At that time, my political commissar joked that the German army might not want to starve us here. Everyone laughed, but I didn't. Although the German army did not attack in these 2 days, the Soviet army did not stop digging fortifications. They dug and dug inside the long defensive line, creating dense and well-connected trenches and large blast holes. Then Angelina told a famous joke, and everyone laughed. Only Rosia didn't laugh because the military supplies director had already reported to her twice. The grain is only enough to last for 3 days, and the higher authorities require us to hold on until mid-July, which means we cannot retreat before the 11th. Rosia was a highly obedient soldier because she had seen officers who were executed for disobedience before. As a result, she fell into a psychological shadow and dared not disobey orders anymore, fearing that one day the Ministry of Internal Affairs would call her for a conversation. Last time she was called by the Ministry of Internal Affairs to discuss whether there was mountaintop ideology, she was almost scared to tears, but fortunately no one noticed. What else can we do now? We can only cut back on food. The next day, Angelina was holding a bowl of borscht soup that was twice as thin as before, lost in thought. The political commissar expressed strangeness. Disgruntled crooked head. After asking the division commander and comrade, Rosia said that she was also very tired, and there was not much food left. She could only do this, and she was also worried that her comrades would cause trouble. Looking at Rosia's worried expression, Angelina had originally intended to tell her about the things that had to be said between Cao Cao and the grain supervisor Wang Xian, pronounced the same as Empress, in a famous Chinese novel. But after thinking about it, she still gave up. We are Dwerich. Chapter 7. Whether to leave or stay. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A difficult order was issued to the troops. The division commander ordered that if there was not enough food and the task was not completed, the food would be halved. Angelina had to turn into a gyroscope and wander around the 3 brigades of the reorganized 13th Division, stabilizing the emotions of the officers and soldiers. Either doing ideological work, or on the path of doing ideological work. Today is July 5, and there are still 6 days left to complete the task. Previously, there was also a loss of food in the artillery fire. Now there is only a normal 2-day share left. To be honest, even if the daily supply is halved, it won't last until July 11th. Lucia, however, was very calm. Anyway, her superiors demanded to hold the position before midday. Isn't it okay for me to just hold on until midnight on July 10th? At that time, they will immediately turn in and can be considered as the first group of legally withdrawn troops. Besides, going to war is not about not dying. Maybe the food problem will be solved by itself. And there will definitely be some allies whose minds are not flexible enough to share the pressure for themselves. Rosia trimmed her hair and continued to rehearse the front line with the Chief of Staff. At 3 a.m. on July 6, 1941, the Germanic Superman launched a night raid against the time difference in combat debuff. The flare was fired into the sky, causing a violent combustion and turning the night into day. For a moment, many Soviet soldiers woke up from their sleep and got up in a daze, only to be knocked down by the sudden shelling. Soon, the shelling stopped. "They're coming up," someone habitually shouted. So, the officers and soldiers of the 2nd Brigade immediately began to charge out of the gun hole and enter the trench. Unexpectedly, it was not the German army who welcomed them, but another round of artillery fire covering them. National abuse. The entire position was once again shrouded in gunpowder, and most of the brave soldiers who rushed too fast were killed on the spot. Only a puddle of soil soaked in blood, 2 or 3 small objects used during their lifetime, were left to prove who they were once. The second round of shelling stopped again, but few Soviet soldiers dared to enter the trenches, afraid of being bombed again. Only the political commissar and a small number of soldiers entered the battle. Angelina saw that everyone dared not rush and looked at her as the political commissar. Okay, she immediately set an example and grabbed a handful of Mosinah gun before rushing out of the blast hole. "Comrades, come with me, Bula." Everyone gritted their teeth and rushed out again. Listening to the increasingly dense gunfire outside, some soldiers who had previously dared not come out also rushed out of the trench and joined the battle. At this time, the German army had bought a lot of time due to 2 shelling attempts. Although there were also accidental injuries, the result was that they had already charged less than 100 meters in front of the Soviet position. In real life, with such a short distance, a faster person may only need 13 seconds. But in this short 100 meters, the German army paid a heavy price. The difference in shooting accuracy between the two sides has been greatly reduced at this distance. Combined with the bonus of trenches, although the firepower is still not comparable, it can basically achieve a 2-for-1 exchange. That's right, the defensive side is that too. Just like the 38-year Plaster Army, the 41-year Iron Crusader is simply incomprehensible to their opponents. But soon, with the addition of armored units, the Iron Crusaders became even more aggressive, and the situation once again developed in a direction that was unfavorable for the reorganization of the 13th Division. Looking at the tanks roaring towards the position with black smoke coming from behind, Angelina felt a sense of powerlessness in her heart. They couldn't do it at all. Bang! Another shot was fired, and a soldier from the other side who was charging fell to the ground in response. Suddenly, Angelina felt uneasy in her heart, as if she had been targeted by someone. She didn't hesitate at all, believed in her intuition, and immediately hunched over and ran to the side. A soldier next to him saw the political commissar of the division suddenly leave and followed suit. In less than 3 seconds, there was a sudden boom from behind, and a shell hit directly at the location where Angelina had been before. Then she felt a shockwave mixed with terrifying temperatures that lifted herself away. "I'll go. The lottery is hanging." Angelina fell heavily to the ground, supporting her waist, which had been scratched by shrapnel. Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed tightly due to pain. Looking back, the soldier who followed him had already fallen into a pool of blood. Angelina struggled to crawl over and gently shook the soldier's shoulder. "Comrade, can you still hear me clearly?" The soldier's chest heaved violently, and his 7 orifices were bleeding. His lips twitched slightly, and in the end, his head tilted and he stopped breathing, clearly sacrificing himself. At this moment, Angelina realized that his back was almost covered in shrapnel. It can be said that without this warrior, one would be disabled even if they didn't die. Closing his still angry eyes, Angelina saluted him with a military salute. "Thank you, comrade." Without time for silence, Angelina, with a pale face, casually tore off a cloth strip from her body and tied it to the wound on her waist to reduce bleeding. The Moxinigan that accompanied her for a few days just now was also lost in this narrow escape, and I don't know which corner it was thrown into. "Take out the matching gun from your waist, it's okay, it's not broken yet. This type of close combat is still more suitable. The issue of artillery support has already been discussed, and if it were during the day, it would probably have arrived long ago. This night attack not only took advantage of the Soviet Union's inadequate defense, but also caused the Soviet Union to suffer from the mistaken belief that there was only one round of artillery fire. Although we don't know what the casualties are now, they will definitely not be less. These dogs FXS. The original owner's thoughts are subtly influencing Angelina, causing her to rapidly transform. Suddenly, a sharp roar of gunfire came from behind. A round of shells hit the charging German army, almost every shell achieving some success. The artillery's 2nd Battalion, which had already determined the parameters of the second line of defense, immediately provided artillery support to the 2nd Brigade after slightly adjusting the shooting distance to a distance. For a moment, the German army, which was almost ready to charge into the battlefield, was suddenly isolated and helpless. Their rear troops were bombed and turned upside down, with heavy casualties. The shelling gradually stopped, and suddenly, I don't know who shouted "Tula" in the dark night, launching a countercharge. Some Soviet soldiers jumped out of the trenches and rushed out with a loud roar. "Yeah, who's not dying anymore?" Then, Angelina saw a scene that left her stunned. The majority of the remaining personnel of the 2nd Brigade unexpectedly jumped out of the trench and collided with the rushing German army, starting a brutal hand-to-hand combat. For a moment, the screams and howls of the two armies intertwined. In the chaos, Angelina couldn't even find the commander of the 2nd Brigade. But she knew that if the German army had another round of indiscriminate shelling at this time, it would be an absolute disaster for the second line of defense. The first person to break out of the trench must not be caught by oneself after the war. He is so disorganized and undisciplined that he must be immediately sent to the Ministry of Internal Affairs for education. At this point, Angelina could only let out a long sigh, trying her best to gather the troops that had rushed out not far and calm them down. The only thing we can do next is to let fate take its course. The German frontline command. "Colonel, the resistance of the Slavic barbarians is fierce and they have already engaged in hand-to-hand combat with our sharp sword troops." "How is the situation?" the newly appointed teacher asked. "It's terrible, they almost got mixed up. But it's obvious that Slavs have a lot of people on their side." "Artillery." "What?" "Your Excellency, this will accidentally harm our troops." "I said, shelling." The cold voice rang out once again. The other person's voice was visibly trembling. "Yes." Listening to the footsteps of the person leaving, a smile appeared at the corner of the newly appointed teacher's mouth. 5 minutes later, the German artillery fire washed the ground again. 10 minutes later, in front of the second line of defense of the Soviet army, only the remaining soldiers groaned in pain. The German army immediately launched a general attack. Due to the injury sustained by the commander of the 2nd Brigade, Apolevsky, in the previous battle and being sent to the rear, Angelina took over the command. Due to the absence of a radio station and the extremely fierce fighting on the front line, even the communication soldiers could not be dispatched and could not inquire about the opinions of the division headquarters. A major decision lay before Angelina. Should we go? Is it staying? Chapter 8. Steel Defense Line. You are listening at novelfull.audio. We can't withdraw. Angelina immediately made up her mind. It's not just because of her political commissar status, nor because she disregards the lives of soldiers, but because she has to do it. You lost your second line of defense early on July 6, so how can you survive with a third line of defense for so many days to come? We must block the enemy here to the death. Even if we run out of it, we won't hesitate. Thinking of this, Angelina immediately sent messengers to the rear for assistance and quickly organized a counterattack. Finally, there were still some troops returning. Angelina counted them and found that the entire 2nd Brigade only had over 1,000 soldiers left, of which over 900 still had combat capabilities. The death rate has far exceeded 50%, yet it has not collapsed yet. This is simply a miracle. Command post of the 13th Division of the Soviet Army Reorganization. Rosia was discussing today's combat plan with the Chief of Staff, but suddenly received bad news from the communication soldiers. After hesitating for a few seconds, the corner of her mouth twitched and she held back a sentence, "Damn it." Subsequently, she dared not delay for a moment and withdrew troops from the 3rd line of defense, preparing to support the 2nd line of defense. What if Comrade Political Commissar orders a retreat? Dukachikov hesitated and expressed some concern. You just lack the ability to make decisions. I believe that the Political Commissar will not retreat. The German Frontline Command. This division commander's name is Exxon von Rahn, and he comes from a Junker aristocratic background. He has never valued the lives of his soldiers. Therefore, he has a nickname, Cold Sir, in the military. This cold refers to cold blood. At this moment, he couldn't help but sneer as he listened to the increasingly sparse gunfire from the Soviet positions. What does it mean that he can't do what Stern can't do in so many days, and he's going to do it himself in a few hours? He was tired of the Soviet troops that were on the verge of collapse before. Now, he needs to go up in intensity. And this unit, which he thinks has something to offer, doesn't seem to last long. The advantage lies in me. His lips couldn't help but slightly curl up. But as time passed by, he couldn't laugh anymore. In his calculations, the Soviet army with at most 1 regiment left has not yet lost its fighting spirit. Even more fiercely resisted than at the beginning. But there was no sign of panic on his face. It's a bit interesting, add more attacking troops to me. Angelina has become somewhat numb now. Her left arm was hit with a penetrating wound, which does not affect the battle, but, hey, it hurts too much. Of course, such words can only be said in the heart. She only wrapped a few bandages on the surface and continued to fight without any abnormalities. The fact that the commander has been active on the front line is a mixed blessing. If beneficial, it can mainly boost morale and stabilize military morale. If we talk about cheating, the death rate of Soviet political commissioners can explain this issue well. On the battlefield, the collapse of a unit is almost separated by a narrow line of red eyes, and whether to be a deserter or a martyr is just a fleeting thought. It is obvious that the Soviet army on the battlefield has not collapsed, but has instead been nailed here like a nail, making it difficult for the German army to move forward. Colonel, we can't fight anymore. Their morale is too strong. Even if we overwhelm the whole army, the enemy's reinforcements will quickly arrive. We should withdraw immediately. Exxon von Rahn looked at the young man in front of him with a gloomy expression. His sharp gaze was like a sword, piercing through the courage of the talkative. The German officer suddenly stopped speaking. Say it, why don't you say it? Are you a teacher, or am I a teacher? Colonel Rahn pointed his hand towards the Soviet position ahead. You, lead the death squad to lead the charge. This is a great opportunity to make great achievements, I have specially left it for you. Let's go, let's go. The military order was hard to disobey, and although it was bound to be unlucky, the German officer quietly walked out and said, "One day. There are still too few people, and as we fight, there are fewer and fewer of us, but the German army is fighting more and more." Angelina didn't know how many German soldiers she had taken down. She even saw a German officer personally lead a suicide squad to charge. She deeply admired this and then pulled the trigger. As a result, her hand trembled and the bullet deflected, ultimately shooting the German officer in the right leg. And the German soldier beside the officer quickly rescued the superior who had already stepped into hell with half of his foot. Damn it, if she hadn't been injured, she could have left that officer here. Angelina reluctantly tapped her thigh with her right fist. At the same time, her eyes occasionally glanced back. If reinforcements don't come again, she will really have to shed her last drop of blood to defend her country. While lost in thought, Angelina felt another wave of palpitations. Not good. She was about to move, but because she kept a motion for too long, she stumbled when she wanted to move. After only running 5 or 6 meters, I felt a wave of fatigue and quickly supported myself with my hands, falling to the ground. Suddenly, a figure rushed forward and said, "Political commissar, be careful." Then, a more violent explosion sounded from behind than last time. Done. This was the last thought in her mind, and then she was knocked unconscious. I don't know how long it took, but Angelina woke up from her coma, feeling restless and thirsty, and couldn't help but cough a few times. After trying her best to open her eyes, she found herself lying in the command center. Lucia beside her turned out to be asleep leaning on a chair. After hearing such a little noise, he suddenly woke up and gasped for breath, as if having a nightmare. "Comrade Political Commissar, you're awake. What's going on? I feel like I've been knocked unconscious by a shell." Angelina's head was still buzzing and her whole body seemed to be shattered. Rosia made a shush gesture, picked up a military kettle and poured it into Angelina's mouth. "Stop talking for now, take a sip of water," she said after drinking some water. Angelina's spirit also improved. "How are the positions and the 2nd Brigade doing?" "The position has been defended, and the 2nd Brigade has also been damaged. If it weren't for the security guard I sent out sacrificing his life to protect you, you would have become a member of the list of casualties today," Lucia recounted with a look of fear on her face. "So, that security guard." Rosia didn't say anything, just shook her head. She glanced at time again and then stood up and walked out. "Since you've already woken up, there shouldn't be any problem. You just stay at the command center and don't move, I'll go check the position again. Pay attention to safety." Rosia's footsteps paused. "I will." Chapter 9. Lonely Hanging West Bank. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, Angelina, lying alone in the command center, almost listened to the sound of gunfire all day, even mixed with the sound of airplanes. Thinking with your toes, these planes are also German. After all, the name, Screaming Death, is not for nothing. The sound of diving bombing was like a sharp sword, almost piercing through a person's eardrums. At present, although the Soviet Army is frantically building military equipment, the number and quality of aircraft produced are far inferior to those of the German Army. In addition to having air control in some important positions, the German Air Force the final say in other places. If it weren't for that chubby guy still around, the current situation might have been even worse. Due to the death and injury of senior commanders, their deputy commanders took over the command, and even Rosia and Dukachikov went to the forefront to command the operations. It is evident that the battle ahead is intense. Finally, as night fell, the German army temporarily suspended their attack. Tonight is likely to be a safe night, because the German army is not so foolish as to think that the Soviet army will relax their vigilance before the next night after suffering a loss. I have only heard of revenge not staying overnight, and I have not heard of night raids not staying overnight. In the middle of the night, Angelina woke up several times from her dreams. Her mind kept playing back the scenes of the soldiers who sacrificed themselves in front of her. "Ah, I can't sleep anymore." Feeling as if the wounds on her body were no longer bleeding, Angelina tried to prop herself up with her right arm. "It's so sour and refreshing." With a grinding sound, she finally sat up. After 30 seconds, I adapted to the sitting state, and then I stood up. Unexpectedly, she suddenly became violent, and as a result, she took a drunken step in the command center. Oh, no no no. In a moment of desperation, an English sentence burst out of her mouth. 5 seconds later, she rubbed her flickering waist, her face full of lovelessness. But anyway, our dear political commissar has learned to walk for the second time, which is a huge progress in her personal history. It has epoch-making significance. Okay, embarrassing cancer. At this moment, a tired and dusty Lucia walked into the command post, throwing her hat onto the sand table and saying, "I'm so tired." Unexpectedly, she turned her head and found that Angelina hadn't slept, and she was still looking at herself from the side. Her expression instantly became constipation, and she said, "Oh, comrade political commissar, why haven't you slept yet?" "I slept full. It's you who really impressed me now." Who would have thought that the teacher, who usually looks serious, would be so unruly in private? "I think you should pay attention to your speech and behavior, comrade Rosia." Unfortunately, Rosia had just returned and didn't even have time to drink a sip of water, so she was scolded by the political commissar for half a day. The casualties today were also significant, mainly in the 3rd Brigade. Rosia looked at Angelina with some pain in her eyes. "If it weren't for that plane bombing, we would definitely have lost a few hundred more people." "So, how many people do we still have now?" Angelina went straight to the topic. Rosia pondered for a moment. "The 1st Brigade still has 1931 people, the 2nd Brigade has the largest casualties, with only 642 people left. The 3rd Brigade suffered some casualties today, but there are still 2,557 people left. There are still 478 people from the remaining 2nd and 3rd Battalions in the artillery regiment, including non-combatants including us." Halfway through, Rosia suddenly remembered that Angelina seemed to have been injured in battle. "Well, there are 862 non-essential combat personnel left. It can be said that we have some experience in defensive warfare now." "Well, comrade political commissar, to be honest, this is my first time conducting a large-scale command operation on both sides." Rosia scratched her head, picked out a small piece of soil from her hair, and threw it away, carefully looking at the political commissar. 6470, Angelina calculated the number in her mind. "Is it almost half disabled?" "You should know that although the reorganized 13th Division is not elite, at least its name carries the name of reorganization, with about 12,000 people in total. At present, there are only over half of the people left, and there will be 3 full days left on the 8th, 9th, and 10th, which is difficult to handle. Comrade political commissar, there's no need to be so pessimistic. At least there's some bad news." "Oh. The grain is now completely sufficient." "Oh." However, on the midnight of July 8, 1941, the Soviet army on the west bank of the Dnieper River strictly followed orders and quickly withdrew from the battle. So, without knowing it, the 13th Division suddenly became one of the few Soviet troops left on the West Bank. However, the other few were held tightly by the German army and couldn't leave. Only the 13th Division was reorganized because it lost contact and did not know the order. On the morning of July 8, 1941, the German army launched another attack on the positions of the reorganized 13th Division. Angelina was still left with 2 guards by Lucia, citing her recovery, and locked in the command post. Actually, Angelina has already recovered and can even jog. As a result, the division commander remained silent and locked her in the command post. She was so anxious that she kept circling around the post, listening to the gunfire on the front line, but couldn't help. At noon, she couldn't help but walk to the door and was about to leave, only to be stopped by 2 guards outside. "Comrade political commissar," the teacher said, "you cannot leave this door." "Is she in front of you now, or am I in front of you?" "Comrade political commissar, we only follow the orders of our teachers." "Oh. Only following the orders of the teacher. Now I have to speak carefully." Now, the 2 guards were surrounded by the words of the political commissar and were trained to be stunned. What political commissar said is right, what I was wrong, these words are like water constantly flowing out of a water pipe. But they also did not forget their responsibility to protect Angelina. As a result, she said at least let herself out, but these two ignorant fools still didn't listen. Unable to do anything, Angelina finally had to take these two thick and sturdy guards out of the command post. As a result, before the three of them could walk much further, the sharp whistling of Stuka bombers diving and bombing could be heard above their heads. 5 minutes later, the three people who were lying on the ground and finally managed to escape death looked at the command post, which was already engulfed in flames, in shock. Angelina's mouth twitched, but in the end, she couldn't help but utter a national curse. This time I really missed the Grim Reaper. Chapter 10. The battlefield is still in operation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rosia's Diary. On the afternoon of July 8, 1941, the command post was bombed. At that time, I looked at the thick smoke rising behind me. I almost thought I was going to say goodbye to my political commissar. If you don't die in a great disaster, there will always be good fortune. 3 people walked through a barrage of bullets and quickly reached the third line of defense, where they met Comrade Dukachikov, the chief of staff of the division. The chief of staff was very surprised when he saw Angelina and said, "Comrade Political Commissar, you haven't died yet. Do you still hope for me to die? Don't worry, my fate is hard, and the bomb that could kill me has not been made yet." Angelina rolled her eyes at this and said, "How did this guy talk? All right, let's not mention this for now. How is the front line now?" Dukachikov's expression became gloomy as he sighed and shook his head. "The second line of defense now is the defense of the 3rd Brigade, but at most it will be held until the afternoon. Can't it be any longer?" Angelina couldn't help feeling nervous. "It's possible." Dukachikov's words reignited hope for Angelina. But the following sentence, like a basin of water, extinguished her hope. "But the soldiers will be fighting in the trenches that have already been blasted flat." Is it really good to speak so loudly and gasp for breath? Angelina began to quickly calculate that the duration of the battle was 5 days, and 2 lines of defense were lost. On average, 1 line of defense could block it for 2.5 days. There are less than 2.5 days left until July 11th. So, it seems like it's just right. Of course, that's not how the accounts are calculated. We also need to consider the repair time of the 3rd defense line, which is longer than the 1st and 2nd defense lines. Therefore, it is definitely more advantageous for defense, so it seems like my real advantage this time is. Oh, by the way, we also need to consider the number of people. They have almost no reserve team left and can only rely on micro-operations on the battlefield, demolishing the east wall to make up for the west wall. If we continue to make up for it, one day the whole house will collapse with a loud bang. Even if the blue sky excavator team comes, they can only use the joystick to shake it, indicating that they are powerless. Cough, I pulled it too far. In short, there is a possibility of successful defense. That's enough. In the evening, with these reasons, Angelina can turn her ideological work into a flower and keep everyone's morale rising. Proud, Comrade Political Commissar, Comrade Political Commissar. Comrade Chief of Staff, I was just thinking about deployment issues. Oh, well, now I'm fine too. Let's just discuss first. Okay. I was once again caught as a strong soldier. P_Q, at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, the 3rd Brigade finally couldn't resist and orderly withdrew from the 2nd line of defense. The German army then occupied the position and once again offered a gift of artillery fire. German Command Headquarters. Colonel Exxon von Rahn is now shocked. He is shocked by his own advancing speed and also by the opponent's fighting spirit. His propulsion speed is as slow as a turtle compared to other German troops. Because at this time, most of the Soviet troops remaining on the West Bank had already withdrawn. A small portion planned to withdraw until evening, but these Soviet troops were also gradually abandoning their positions. Moreover, the casualty rate of the other party, based on one's own conservative estimation, must have exceeded half. Although he could tell that the morale of the Soviet army was not particularly high, it also depends on the casualty rate. More than half of the casualties have not yet collapsed, which can be considered a miracle of no size. Salute to the volunteers who fought to the point where each soldier died but never took a step back. They are the true miracles. I have tried night raids, shelling, sniping, and even requesting planes to bomb the enemy's headquarters. It's useless. As for why there was no tank charge. His tank is already less than half of the standard, how dare he use it for group charging? Don't get kicked out before taking office for a few days, otherwise he will become the second in the line. When Lucia stumbled into the temporary command post, she suddenly saw Angelina. Rosia's sad gaze instantly turned into shock, followed by ecstasy. She looked at Angelina, so excited that she didn't know what to say. After a while, she smiled and said, "You're not dead yet." Angelina's already smiling face suddenly stiffened, and she gently closed the door to ensure that no one outside would come in. Then he walked step by step towards Rosia, and the smile on his lips became eerie. "If you don't speak, no one will treat you as mute." 2 seconds later, the commander's screams came from the command post, like killing a pig. A few moments later, Angelina released her grip on Rosia's waist and said, "Why do you and the chief of staff owe so much?" Later, she also explained to Lucia how she narrowly escaped death. Rosia was deeply grateful and said that she would educate the 2 guards who looked like 2 dumbfounds next time. At this moment, the sound of shelling echoed outside again. Rosia sighed and urged the political commissar to take good care of herself. Then, she grabbed her gun and went to the front line to command again. Angelina also set off with her 2 silly security guards. Along the way, she asked for the names of 2 people, both very common, one named Peter and the other named Ivanov. I guess it's almost as common as the name Zhang Wei in my original world. Angelina murmured inwardly, but her eyes kept an eye on the battlefield ahead. In the perilous Eastern Front battlefield, if you dare to distract yourself, it is seeking death. Previously, many of the protagonists in her world's online articles would shout and jump up and down on the battlefield as soon as they traveled, fearing that others wouldn't see someone willing to be a live target there. If they were here, they would probably have been shot dead by the other side. Carefully entering the trench with 2 guards, Angelina entered a state of combat after planning her own retreat. Bang! Bang! Change location. Bang! Bang! Change location. In such a cycle, after firing 2 shots with the 2 guards, regardless of whether they had killed anyone or not, Angelina led them away. On the battlefield, only by preserving oneself can we maximize the damage to the enemy. The gunfire gradually subsided. The attacking German army withdrew after leaving behind a pile of corpses. Live another day. Now Angelina's mood is like that of a high school student lying in bed on Thursday. Although there were still Fridays and Saturdays to endure, her heart had already drifted to Sunday. How should we spend these damn 2 days? This is a question.